Hey everybody, and welcome to Classical Stuff You Should Know.
This is what we're gonna sound.
Wow, you sound rough there, buddy.
Yeah, seriously.
Oh man, yeah.
It's because that's how we feel.
Yeah, there's a little bit of sickness floating around
I feel
today.
fine. I feel great.
You said you're gonna go home and take a nap.
Well, that's because I did detention school this morning.
What did you do?
I just
Had to
I
yell
lost
a lot.
my temper.
Yeah, exactly.
I lost my temper on Friday and had to come and do. For those of you who do not know Veritas, we have a Saturday school, much like the Breakfast Club.
No, in fact, not much like.
We don't leave them in a room together.
That's true. We don't leave them in a room together. No, and they don't just sit in the library and do nothing. No, we've got Saturday school where we've just moved to a new campus and we come and we've got lots of chores to do. And the kids that have accrued a number of marks, which are our version of demerits, have to come. And so at 6:45, I and many of our
vaguely disgruntled youth.
Yes, vaguely disgruntled youth descended upon campus and picked up trash and moved things into storage containers and washed windows and all these sorts of fun things.
And I can't tell if it's just you getting sick. You sound deeply unhappy as you describe this.
I'm sleepy, but you guys don't sound very good.
I'm
Hamburg's
pretty ill.
falling apart.
I think I missed those were my first 2 days to miss of work since
Really?
I started here. Yeah.
I mean, that's
I almost never. Yeah.
Iron Man streak's over.
Well, actually, AJ, I believe you recently watched a movie related to this, so get excited. So, elementary, middle, and high school, I never missed a day of school.
What?
Ever. You are unbreakable.
According to M. Night Shyamalan, what am I?
You're a superhero.
I'm a superhero. And then, as of last week, I was no longer a superhero.
Oh, well.
So, that happened.
Oh. Well, at least you don't have to tangle with a Mr. Glass.
Yeah, see, I've only seen the first one. Does he tangle in the first one?
Yeah, I mean, he finds out that Mr. Glass is a bad dude.
Yeah. But then, anyway.
They're not really against each other.
Didn't you go and see the new one?
I did.
And it was
a movie.
A movie.
It was a nice Shyamalan movie.
It was good. I don't know. It was not bad. I enjoyed it.
Not bad, raves AJ Hannenberg of Classical Stuff.
So, for those of you who are...
Would you say unorthodox?
Aha!
Hey.
It's all connected.
All right. For those of you who are new to our podcast, let me go ahead and tell you what it is and what we do before getting any further. My name is AJ Hannenberg. I am here with Graham Donaldson and Thomas Magby.
Hello.
And we three are teachers and educators at Veritas Academy in Austin, Texas. And we all love classical things. We like old books. We like old philosophy. We like art and architecture and all kinds of music and all kinds of old stuff. And that's what we're all about. And we try to bring that to you in a way that is totally palatable. So my understanding is that today we are discussing barbers from ancient times.
Barbers?
Yeah, like the ones who cut your hair.
I don't make the connection for me.
And then they have the fashion shows?
Wait, well, we're talking about heresy.
Yeah.
What is
that what it's called?
The Heresy.
This is so upsetting. This is every time it's a punch to the gut. Okay, so no, I feel like I make worse puns than you all, so I should be laughing more often.
No, that was really bad. It was a stretch and a half.
That's why I was thinking about it as we went. So I saw the hair connection. Anyway, here we are. That was sorry.
Oh.
Okay, so yes, today we're going to be talking about heresy. This was prompted first by.
I'm stoked.
I don't understand why.
I'm chuffed.
I just want to hear all about modalism.
It's not on the list.
You're not doing modalism?
It's not on my. So this is a fun time. So now I've destroyed your happiness. So I'm glad we could do this. So what prompted this? This was first prompted by AJ, your episode on St. Nicholas, and you talked about the literal story of St. Nicholas punching Arius in the face. 100% true. It's what happened. Don't deny it.
It's not.
It's not what happened. Okay, so you talked about that, and then Graham said some untoward things of, Arius, and I stood up for Arius, to which was kind of a silly thing because he's a heretic. But there's something to that of the way we remember Arius is like he was a bad dude, right? Isn't that the way the story goes? He wanted to destroy orthodoxy, and so he persuaded people of these wicked things.
But we have no idea what he actually said.
The story I knew is that he was a real good salesman and had like jingles and helped it stick in people's minds. Maybe I'm remembering somebody else.
But
when I studied church history.
Cool. Is that he was real clever, and he had like really great 3-point sermons that you remembered.
And he was charismatic, and he had like little pithy sayings that would be like, "He's a different substance, not originally created," like that.
But even
catchy, don't you think?
Super.
I love it. But even when you say it that way, it's more that his rhetoric was good. So he was more of a sophist than anything, right?
God and Christ are different stuff.
Different stuff is God and Christ.
History of the musical. I kind of like this. So
Why hasn't anybody written this musical is my question.
because it would be so boring.
Heresy the musical.
It sounds awful. Oh,
I
no?
really want to say.
There's a Mormon musical. It's kind of.
The Book of Mormon is... I think it's
Close
a stretch to
enough.
call it a Mormon musical.
I've never seen it. I just assume it's about Mormons.
It is about Mormons.
That is the subject.
It's
for sure.
technically accurate. It's by the people who do South Park. So,
Oh, ooh.
yeah.
I think you would call it reverent.
Irreverent?
No, yeah, it's incredibly respectful, very reverent. None of the characters are overblown or exaggerated.
This is uncomfortable.
Oh, remind me part way through this podcast to tell you when I accidentally stumbled into a like Chinese religious revival.
I feel like you should tell the story
dance
now.
story.
Why don't you tell the story
Wait,
now?
dance?
Okay, there's this banned religion in China. What's it called? Is it Falun Gong? I think that's what it's called. The Falun
Gong, yes.
And I used to live in Toronto, and a lot of adherents to it would be in Toronto, and they would hand out pamphlets, and I knew nothing about it. Anyway, so there's this like traveling dance show that comes to Austin, and it travels around North America, and it comes at Christmas time, and it says, come watch traditional Chinese dancing. And, the adverts have people doing like flips and throwing swords and stuff. And we're like, oh, this sounds awesome. So my wife and I got tickets to it. Halfway through it, we realized pretty quickly that this was like the Falun Gong's version of like vocational Bible school.
Oh.
Like there was a hard sell on like not joining, but I'm just like being sympathetic to it. And this one guy came on and like sang a song about how the end of history is going to happen and we're all going to be vindicated and everyone in China is going to realize that they should have been following us. And then the last dance number was this very heavily tinged apocalyptic, like basically the end of the world came and these gods descended from the ceilings. And then all the faithful are taken up into heaven, and there was like floating Buddha statues and stuff. And my wife and I were like, "What are we watching?"
Seriously.
Anyway, that's
Did they throw swords?
yeah. It was
Then
cool.
I'm on board.
Then you're
It was
okay
awesome.
with it. Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, sorry, I've derailed this.
No, it's fine. We'll also be talking about Falun Gong in this. That's not true. Heresy. So kicked off by AJ's podcast of talking about Arius in relation to St. Nicholas. And then in our last episode, AJ made this super great comment about not treating the unknown as known. And I would say the title of last podcast if I trusted myself not to giggle about it. But if you look in your podcast feed, you'll see.
En detail.
There, yeah, thank you. Much appreciated. So that idea of not treating the unknown as known is important in talking about heresy as well. So I'm often accused of doing book reviews, so today we will continue in our tradition of...
Don't let my wife bully you, Thomas.
She already does all the time. I just cry about it. That's okay.
She was a goalie. She doesn't take any guff from anybody.
To hack the bone.
Yeah. So
Hack the bone? Is that something they say in hockey?
Yeah. If their shin guards aren't on properly, just get a stick in there and.
that's horrible.
And hack the
Yeah,
bone?
chop that tree, knock them
horrible.
down. Hey, if they're standing in your crease, all bets are off.
Sitting in your crease? Is that...
What is that?
If you're a goalie, you have a crease, and if you have someone in the blue paint, you can hack the bone.
What's a
Are you speaking... Hello? Graham, are you okay?
Boys,
Are you coming down
you
with
gotta
something?
give her 110%, eh? Forecheck, back check. Just get the pucks in deep.
These aren't words. Okay, so speaking of books, so what is centering our discussion today is a book called Heresies and How to Avoid Them. And Graham and AJ got a kick out of their names when I first shared this with them, so hopefully they'll still giggle. So the author, this book is edited by two people. One of them is named Ben Quash. Anyone? No one? Okay. And
Quash
Michael
there.
Ward. So today we're going to
Ward
quash,
and quash.
Yeah, we're going
Wrote
to
a
quash
book
your
on
heresies
heresies.
and ward
I
them
love it.
off. Yeah, this sounds about right.
Warding them off and quashing them.
So, heresies and how to avoid them, why it matters, what Christians believe. That is what we are talking about today. So,
What is a heresy? Is there?
this is our first place to start. Yeah. And so part of my confusion as to why you all are excited about this is that almost the least interesting thing about talking about heresies is the heresies themselves. But I'm worried that anyway, I have like 3 or 4 main ideas related to heresies that I guess we'll get to at the end. And I guess we'll get there by talking about the heresies. But yeah, we're talking about mostly early church heresies. The book is split into 2 different sections. The first section are 4 heresies related to the character of Christ, and then the the back half is more about like church life. So things about how we think about the Old Testament. I guess we'll get into that in a little bit. So yeah, sure. We should start off with a definition of what is a heresy. Does anyone want to take a swing, like to understand the idea of heresy?
I will take a crack.
Go for it.
My understanding of heresy is specifically regarding sort of Christian faith is a belief about, or an interpretation of the story that builds into a theological premise or theological position, and if that theological position is held and believed and sort of works itself out into a community, it makes salvation impossible. Like it undercuts the rest of the story. That's sort of the
Makes salvation impossible.
or it makes it puts a disjointure into the rest of the story. So, like, for example, Arians say that Christ is of a different nature and a different substance of God, and you can have proof from the text, or you can have sort of things that you cite, like he was the firstborn of creation, I think it's in Colossians. And I think that kind of is the big maybe cited Arian verse saying that Christ is a created being. He's the firstborn of creation, different from God. But so if you hold that belief, it makes the rest of the salvation narrative not work, because if
This is a great point.
If God had to be man,
Yep.
You needed the perfect sacrifice that only God could do. You needed the perfect representation of the accused, a man, like it. You couldn't perfectly wipe away the sins with a goat,
right?
And you couldn't perfectly wipe away the sins with an angel, because the angels weren't representative of the accused party.
Right.
So you needed a perfect man, and so you needed a God man, and so if he wasn't God and was a different substance of God, then you still don't have a perfect sacrifice. So that's that's what I mean by this is that it's one thing that you've said about Jesus, or it's one thing that you've said about the nature of God, which is often what the heresies are. But if you played it out to its logical conclusion, it throws in disharmony into the rest of these other theological positions, so that like the full understanding of the gospel and how it works isn't going to work, because now you've taken out apart. Or
I like your definition. Mine was just untrue things about God. It would be a heresy.
Yeah. So I think Graham is getting at why heresies matter, and then AJ's is more. There is a more fundamental definition. So this is. I feel like so few books are clear on things in the way that this book is. So literally the first sentence of the first page. Ideas achieve the status of heresies in Christian tradition because they are thought by the church to be wrong rather than right teaching or doctrine. A heretic is a baptized person who obstinately denies or doubts a truth which the church teaches must be believed because it is part of the one divinely inspired and Catholic, that is universally valid, Christian faith.
So it has to be a baptized person?
To be a heretic, yes.
So, otherwise, they're just a non-believer. They believe something else.
You want to say more? Because I think
I think that's helpful.
I think this distinction matters to say that.
I think it does too.
Yeah, so this isn't...
Because if you meet some guy on the street and he's like, God is a giant turtle, you can be like, you do you, man.
Right. Yeah, the appropriate reaction to that is not to...
Call him a heretic.
Because he's not. He's not saved. He's not baptized. He's not in the church family yet. So that... I think it's an important distinction to say that this is... So when we're talking about these things in this podcast today, they're inter-family conflicts. Is that the right way to call them?
Yeah,
It's brothers fighting brothers.
A family squabble.
Yeah, family squabble is the right way to put it. So it does not relate to religions outside of Christianity. It does not relate to people outside of the Christian faith. So I think that is an important thing to point out. What Graham is talking about is especially why it's kind of why the book is split into these two sections of heresies about Christ and then heresies about stuff that's not Christ. Because if there are things that aren't true about Christ in these first four chapters, then it messes with the substitutionary
substitutionary atonement.
That's what I was going to say, but that's a goofy word. It messes with his ability to be our representative in sacrifice. It messes with the ability of that sacrifice to pay for our sin.
Yeah. So if God was just like a spectral projection of a man and not actually a man, if he was like Luke Skywalker in the new Jedi movie, whatever it's called, The Last Jedi.
Your favorite one, yeah.
Oh, that movie sucked. Anyway, wow. if so if he wasn't actually I think there's a heresy that was, Jesus, he wasn't actually a man because like his flesh is evil, so he was just like a real good hologram.
Gnosticism?
I don't know which one it is.
I
defer to my expert.
Is that me? Not Gnosticism, but yeah, we'll talk about it later. Do you want to?
No,
we'll
it's
get
just
there in a little bit.
all these different heresies regarding Christ. So that's like the opposite. Anyway,
Yeah. Just a few more as preface before we go into the statements themselves or the heresies themselves. I thought this echoed really well what AJ was saying in the last episode. When all is said and done, orthodoxy is the hard discipline of learning to say what needs to be said and no more. Too often, those we learn to call heretics have tried to say more than can be said. They have succumbed to the temptation to say too much by explaining what cannot be explained. And that's a majority of them, is that they want to go too far. There are a few of them that don't go far enough, and the book kind of splits those out. But more often than not, there's a mystery to God, and the heretics go too far in wanting to clarify that mystery.
are we going to do a quiz show?
As to what the heresies are?
Yeah. Are you going to like tell us the heresy? We need to tell you the name, or are you going to tell us the name and we need to tell you what the heresy is?
I'd rather do it. Yeah, I'd rather do it that way. Can I give you one last thing?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's related to this. This might not be interesting. So there's another thing called a schism versus a heresy. Does anyone want to take a swing at that one?
As far as I know, a schism is a disagreement within the church that causes a break in organization.
Yeah.
And is it something that is a difference of opinion on something that is not centrally orthodox? So like the Grand Schism was between icons, right? And so the Eastern Church saying that these icons had a... Was it that they had a... that they almost had the same kinds of things that happened at communion? They had a sacramental presence, or they had a sacramental authority. The Eastern Church said this, and the Roman Catholic Church said no, they don't. They're just nice pictures. I can't remember. There was the schism was over the icons.
But that's the thing. I think
Was it
schism.
the Monophysites?
Schism is a divorce in the family, whereas a heresy is a spat.
Yeah. So the goal, I guess, this story will be repeated over and over again. So what happens in heresy is, even using the word is complicated because AJ raised this at some point a few episodes ago of, I forget what the topic was, but it was something to the effect of people believe something before the church made a formal stance on it. Were they heretics at the time? Do you remember this? I think it might have been the
I
same
do not
episode
remember
also.
this.
I think it was talking about about Arians of, so people held the position of Arianism before the Council of Nicaea. Were they heretics before the Council of Nicaea?
Maybe, but only in common practice. And I mean, much of the church's doctrine was defined in reaction to contrary doctrines.
Yes.
Like many of the councils happened because the Gnostics were getting popular, because Arianism was becoming popular, because, for various reasons.
That's what.
Very rarely do they call a big council where everybody has to travel and they're like, let's just have a meeting.
Agree on things.
Everybody hang out and go over what we all agree on, you know.
It's like camp.
Yeah. There are very few of those.
Sounds great. It's like a networking session.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my answer...
Pass out your LinkedIn. It's like, I'm the Bishop of Milan. It's like...
Sounds miserable. So you all should push back on me if I'm wrong, but I believe the answer is no, that
they were not heretics until
it is established as doctrine.
Well, it wasn't contrary to orthodoxy yet.
It wasn't. So this is the complication. So Arianism was wrong all along, but it wasn't established as doctrine until the Council of Nicaea. Is that... So the view opposed to Arianism was always right, but it was not established as orthodoxy until the council.
Well, these things need to work themselves out, right?
Yes.
Like you need to... I wonder if there's even like a... Theoretically, there should also be the practical aspect of heresies, right? Like if a heresy is in fact not true, but it's held in belief in the church, then theoretically you should not see the church grow spiritually or have the fruits of the Spirit like growing in its members. So if you deeply believe that that in some sort of Gnostic heresy, and deep in your core you believe that like the human body and the created natural world is somehow inherently sinful, and you act out of that belief, then there should be no outworking of fruit in your life. I can see how that could be a really controversial statement to say, but there's probably there's something to that where you need to sort of see how heresies have worked themselves out in this community, and then the Council of Nicaea can say, all right, this Arian thing is not only against the story that we have received in Scripture, but all the people who are Arians are, have this view about some aspect of creation that is meaning that they're not taking care of the poor or whatever it is, right? Like because they've got some excuse as to not do it.
This is fair, and the book will eventually end with some statement to a similar effect that right belief should live itself out in right action. There are situations where, so again, for some reason, Arianism feels like the perfect example to point to. Arianism spread very quickly and it was just easier to understand than the Orthodox Christian position.
Yeah, maybe to further make the point. So I'm a big believer that we currently in the church right now are living in amidst a time where lots of people don't realize that they are essentially functionally Gnostic, that they think that bodies and the physical world don't matter. And so you see this play itself out in Christian traditions that say things like, well, God's just going to destroy the earth one day, and so we don't really need to take care of it. Or, I believe in my heart, but I don't need to act it out in my body because my heart and my body are not, maybe they would never say it this way, but they're acting out functionally. My heart and my body are not linked. The things that I do with my body don't necessarily affect like the beliefs that I have in my mind. And so you've got this sort of hard disconnect. So, then that's not going to bear itself out in sort of the growth of virtue, where if you and so then you can say, well, the reason why it's not growing itself out in virtue is because you are holding wrong understandings of what it means to be a created in God's image being, and you think that the things that you do with your body are not going to have an effect on your soul. That's a heretical position because it does have an effect on your soul, and you are the sort of unified creature made under God, and your body matters. Anyway, so that's kind of the point that I'm making.
And I think that's also helpful because, again, I think most of the reason we're even talking about this is that I think it is important to have what?
Because every time we ask students questions about like basic theological problems, they work themselves into heretical statements.
There is that. But the other side is that I think we should have some level, compassion feels like the wrong word, but some level of understanding for why there have been heretics or why there are people that we now call heretics.
Yeah.
Like, more accurately, we would say, why were there disagreements in the church about certain theological issues? And the reason is that there were valid points on both sides.
Yes, they're not foaming at the mouth,
most of the
wanting
time.
to tear the sucker down.
There is one of them that is that, but otherwise it is two people who are who are having a disagreement. And what I think is interesting in the definition that we started with, heretic is a baptized believer who obstinately denies or doubts a truth which the church teaches must be believed. So it's that obstinacy, which they don't start out obstinately disbelieving because the orthodoxy has not been established at that point. What is helpful in what you all are saying is that if we are now Gnostics, that's a bigger problem than if you were a Gnostic 1,000 years ago before the theology or the orthodoxy was more fleshed out. So I think that's more what I'm getting at. Let's dive into, I guess, some specifics. We will spend more time on Gnosticism, I guess, because we've been talking about it more. But let's kick off. So there are 4 heresies related to the character of Christ.
Oh, let's go, boys.
So the first of these is Arianism. So what, gentlemen, is Arianism?
Jesus Christ is he is a created being, not an eternal being, and he is of a different substance than the Father, meaning that they're not the same creature. He is I think the preeminent first creation is the doctrine, but he is a creation, which makes him subordinate to the Father, not on equal terms, and not subordinate in the way that we understand the Trinity to be subordinate by choice and hierarchy, but subordinate in that there was a time when he wasn't, and then is a time when he was, and he depends on the Father for his very creation. Yeah. So that's as far as I understand.
Yeah, you got it. So Christ being created is kind of the key part. Yes, exactly. Everything you said.
The verse is with justification. He's the firstborn of creation, or the very fact that, I guess those would be the big ones. That any language partaking to Christ being born.
Yep. Yeah, and I think it's a basic understanding of fatherhood that your kid hasn't been there for the whole time you've been there, right? That doesn't make sense. So I understand how God the Father, God the Son would be confusing to everyone if they have been there at the same time.
And I feel like we've beaten Arianism probably into the ground. Just, again, the main points or just some quotes to run through as we move on to the next one is again, some form of compassion for Arius. A quote I find lovely on like the 3rd page of this chapter. Unlike me, Arius started from a position of strong faith and orthodoxy. He was a well-educated presbyter in one of the leading churches in Alexandria at the beginning of the 4th century, which I thought is just such a sweet sentiment to have. Even though he gets a lot of bad press, Arius was, as far as we can tell, scrupulous and careful in his study of the Bible. Graham made a comment a second ago, I think, about we don't have his writings, so the only way we know what Arius believed is about what other people said that he believed, but his opponents were not presenting him in the best light. So it's I forget if I made this comment on a recording or just in our conversations. It's the same with the sophists, where like they get a bad rap all the time, but we don't actually have the writings of the sophists. So maybe they were actually that bad, or maybe everyone just hated them because they were rich. You know what I mean? Like we don't actually know how bad of people they were. So anything else on Arianism before I keep moving on?
Don't get it confused with white supremacy.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, how did that get connected with the Aryan nations?
I have
Is
no
it just
idea.
a completely different thing?
Isn't it spelled differently?
Oh, buckle up for some Google, ladies and gentlemen, because that's about to happen.
You wanna do that?
In the meantime, Thomas,
Can I keep going? So our next heresy is Docetism. Does anyone know about Docetism?
This is also one with Christ's nature.
Uh-huh. Yeah, so these first 4 all relate to Christ.
Is this the one where Jesus is just like a spectral projection?
I don't know if I would
And
say...
he's not actually, doesn't have a body. It's just a big old trick. And he doesn't actually die. It was just like a whoops.
Yeah, you're getting at so Docetism is the heresy which denies the full humanity of Jesus Christ. The name contains this Greek verb which means to seem.
Yes.
These people held that Jesus only seemed to be human. So became popular among the Gnostics, which we talk about way later. But yeah, so the part of it is the seeming, so not actually being a human. And then
because if I understand correctly, it's coming out of a reverence for divine, for the
Yes,
divinity of Jesus.
exactly.
It's coming out of the reverence for divine. There's something so distasteful of the idea of God dying, of God eating and burping, of God sort of getting dirty with dust on his feet, that the very thought of God's nature, or of the godhood intermingling with dirty humans,
right,
is so off-putting that they say, well, it was just a big old trick, or it just seemed like he was human. But
Wait, so what was it again?
The appearance of Christ being human.
that he's not actually, that he just seems to be human. He's not really.
Oh, he's like something else. Okay.
So like...
I was Googling the Aryan nations.
Did you figure out the answer?
Oh, you were getting fired.
Yeah, I know. So the
We're getting demonetized.
Aryanism is spelled with an I. The Aryan nations is spelled with a Y,
Yeah, there you go.
and comes, I think, from some really old Indo-European script that basically means you're from
Germania.
Iran.
Oh, really?
I think something like that.
That's like when you say Caucasian, the Caucasus Mountains, aren't they in Iran? Mm-hmm. Anyway, so it's kind of the same idea.
I mean, that was the most cursory Google you've ever seen. So I could be. I'm
Proud of you.
probably wrong about this.
No, I'm proud of you. You did it right.
So he's just an illusion human. He's fully God, not fully man.
Yes.
Okay.
So appears to be human, but is not actually human. This actually, if you, Graham and AJ who are here, you see that I flagged like 100 things. Yeah. I flagged nothing in this chapter. So anyway, sorry.
So he's like Beyonce.
What's
Appears human, but is not actually human.
Is she superhuman? Is that
a little more?
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. I'm not sure if you're referencing a song right now.
No,
you just actually feel this way about
I've
Beyonce?
seen her Super Bowl performance, and it was incredible.
It was a classic.
She broke the Super Bowl.
In what way did she break the
lights
Super
went
Bowl?
out.
She
Is that
literally
actually
used
true?
up all the power, and the lights all turned off, and that changed the momentum of the game because one team had been winning pretty handily, and then it gave, I don't know, half an hour for the other team to sort of collect themselves, do some stretching, get a little motivated, drink some Gatorade, and then they came back and won the Super Bowl. I fully blame Beyonce for the outcome of that year's Super
I feel
Bowl.
like you make these things up.
Oh, look it up.
Okay.
Good. Yeah.
Wasn't that Atlanta versus
Seahawks? Was it the Seahawks?
So that was a couple years ago then, isn't that?
Yeah. It was probably
Anyway, sports ball.
4 or 5.
Speaking of sports ball, do y'all watch the IT Crowd?
Yeah.
Have y'all seen that? So
Yeah,
they
I've
have that
seen
one
it.
part where one of the characters is like
Oh.
super not into sports, and so he gets this like cassette tape, and it's how to talk about sports without knowing anything. And do you remember what it is? Like
You see that ridiculous display last night? He just tried to walk it in.
And then he meets someone who like had the same cassette tape, and then they talk about how much they hate sports. Anyway, it's wonderful. It's how I feel about sports ball. Okay, so The third one is Nestorianism. Nestorianism.
Oh, shoot. Nestor.
God. So I think I know this one. Christ is some sort of indwelling being that possessed a man named Jesus and then left just prior to the crucifixion. Or am I thinking Gnosticism?
We'll
Did it nested in him? Is that what I'm thinking?
That might be a form of adoptionism, which we'll get to later. I don't think I'm messing this one up.
There's just so many. We need to do like trading cards or something.
For heresies? So this is the heresy which denies that Christ was a single person, at once God and man. So it's to say that there was a split identity, that there was a separate God nature and a separate human nature. They were not intermingled.
So kind of like that.
Yeah, it sounds similar to it. I don't think there's anything in here about the...
So there's two natures?
Yes, two separate natures.
So like not Monophysite.
Tell me what that...
Monophysite means there is one nature.
Yeah. I guess we'll
One
get...
nature that is 100% God and 100% man.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the thing. So our fourth heresy, I'm for sure going to butcher this. I tried looking this up beforehand, and I did, and then I forgot how to pronounce it. Eutychianism.
Is this the 50-50? Like he's kind of half God, half man?
There's a hybrid nature that is inside Christ. So that hybrid nature is the mingling of God and man. So he's not God, he's not man, he's God-man. It's a separate, it's a third type of nature.
Oh, so it's like if you've ever seen the Underworld movies, it's when the vampires and the werewolves get together and they make a third thing that's more powerful than both.
Dayman.
Yes.
Oh.
You can't reference that on this podcast, Donaldson.
Gonna get in trouble.
I think that's a no-no. Well, I guess if people recognize the reference, they're going to be
then that's
okay
their
with-
fault, right?
No one knows anything.
Yeah, I hope not. Anyway, so those are again.
So far we've referenced really bad TV shows and rated R films.
And Arianism, and the
I
Aryan
guess-
nations.
Yeah, I guess Arianism did a lot more damage than the Underworld movies.
This is
ever
what
did.
happens when you start mingling with heresies, you guys. It just takes you down the primrose path.
What?
Primrose?
Primrose.
Are you okay? Are we all losing our minds right now? You good? Okay. So questions as to the identity of Christ, the type, the what his nature was. So this is why I was separating out. Arianism is more about his creation versus not creation, and we get later to these issues of what is the substance, what is the nature of Christ. So either that he has a fully split human and divine nature. I don't know if you've heard people do this. Sometimes they'll be like, well, this is his human nature here. This is his divine nature here. And they bounce back and forth between those two. But that's not a fair way of talking about him because he is fully both at all times. It's not like he's only one at one time.
When he drinks a soda, he is drinking it as God and as man.
Yes.
But this one's like he's got a partitioned hard drive. Like this time he's working on like Windows 95 and this one he's working on Linux.
He's emulating.
Yeah.
There's like a solid state drive that he runs his OS from, and then a spinning drive that he runs his...
The solid state drive is clearly a divine.
Clearly the divine, because
Yeah.
it's so much faster. You can even drop it, and it does less likely to be damaged.
You all are the weirdest people. Okay, so those are the four heresies related to the character of Christ. So this has been summarized by a theologian.
So what's orthodoxy then?
Let me give it to you. So in 4 words, orthodoxy can be summarized in contradiction to these 4 views that I'll just give it to you. In 4 words: truly, perfectly, indivisibly, distinctly. The first applied to his being God, so he is truly God. The second to his being man, so he's a perfect man. The third to his being of both one, so indivisibly. And the fourth to his still continuing that one. What in the world? Sorry. This is my illness coming up. Do you feel like your brain is pudding when you are ill?
No, right now I feel like there are 2 bodybuilders they both have a palm against each side of my head, and they're just pushing.
Yeah, that's
both
how
of
it
them are
feels.
just pushing on my head.
Or like I start reading and then like I jump 3 lines and don't know how I did it. Okay,
I'm doing great.
So that sounds like you become a superhero for a second. I don't know. I just blank out and I jumped a house. I don't know how I did it.
Well, again, I was unbroken until last week. So
That's got to be a hard truth to
now
deal with.
I'm actually
Poor Iron
not a
Man.
superhero. So let me try this one more time. So starting with the third. The third to his being of both one. So he is both God and man indivisibly. And then and the fourth to his still continuing that one both. And that's distinctly. So there's not a melding of the natures, but he is distinctly God and man. We may fully, by way of abridgment, comprise whatsoever antiquity hath at large handled either in declaration of Christian belief or in refutation of the foresaid heresies. Wow, that sentence made no sense. The summary of what is Orthodox belief is again, truly, perfectly, indivisibly, and distinctly. He is truly God. He is perfect. He is perfect. He is indivisibly God and man, and he is distinctly God and man. It's not an amalgamation of natures.
In many ways, like the heresies are attempts to get us out of paradoxes.
This is great.
And to get us out of statements that are paradoxical. Like, how can he be both, his natures are 100% God and 100% man, but how are they indivisible, or how are they not mushed together? So
right.
we get these paradoxical statements, and then heresies are often these attempts to try to sort of close the loop and really finish the circle and say, well, here's what's really going on, and it's kind of this one thing. But like we've mentioned before, that if you actually hold on to that, especially when it comes to Christ's nature, if you actually hold on to any of those heresies, then substitutionary atonement doesn't work anymore,
And not only that, but I think
we're skunked.
It simplifies God to a point where it would be discouraging for me. I like that I can't understand God and he doesn't fit in my brain. Because if I fully understood everything that was going on there, I feel like, having a lockdown on how God works would be discouraging as a deity.
You'd hope that at some point, since you were talking about a infinite being of immeasurable power, that at some point, like language and your ability to comprehend it should reach its outermost bounds. Because if it didn't, then what are we talking about?
So really fast side note, when we're talking about paradoxes, one of the things that comes up with students all the time is could God create a rock so large he couldn't lift it? And that is, for the record, not a paradox. It's not even really good reasoning, because God is infinite, therefore he can create an infinite rock. And if he created an infinite rock, there's nowhere to move it to. So it cannot move, because it occupies all space. So if anyone ever asks you that question, say, God can create an infinite rock, and no, he can't move it because it would occupy everything. Dum-dum, and then walk off down the street.
Make sure you say the dum-dum part.
That's the important one, is really just put them in their place.
The one that students really just grind them down.
You really press them into the dust with your thumb.
So no, the one that students come across, especially when we're talking about Paradise Lost, is, okay, if God is a standard of goodness, was it just, is what we call good sort of this arbitrary thing that God made, and therefore can change? Can he change the standard? Or is it of his nature, therefore it is an unchangeable standard? I always land on the second one, that's just of his nature. So they say, like, is logic something that God is beholden to? Or does God write like constitutions for himself that he himself can't break? Like, it's on Paradise Lost, God says, I made man unchangeable. I made man free, and if I wanted to have him not fall, I would have to revoke my law unchangeable, that I have decreed him free, and I'm not going to undecree him free. And students are like, wait, but God can do whatever he wants. Why doesn't he just say, like, nuts to my law? And then that opens up the question of, can God say, can God say, I promise to do this, and then be bound by it? I think he can.
But Boethius would agree with you that God's goodness and his nature are inseparable, because if there is a separate goodness from God to which he is subordinate, then he is not the greatest and most powerful thing. He is submitting to something else, and therefore he's not the most powerful. Right? There's a rule that has to rule him, and that's a problem. At least that was Boethius' reasoning. And I'm not saying Boethius is the best. He's got some other problems, like, because you don't want to be dismembered, you clearly seek God. Like, that's some squiffy reasoning.
What are you talking about? This is a great reasoning. I don't want to be dismembered, so I seek God.
I don't think one necessarily leads to the other, but he kind of uses some equivocation to get there. In any case, I think in this particular spot, he reasons pretty well. But let's keep heading.
Yeah, sure. So, sorry, AJ, your question before was about a person being, I forget the phrase that you used, that there was a human baby and then like a God nature entered that baby when it was born. Is that what your question about Nestorianism?
Yeah, that's what I thought Nestorianism was. I think that's actually probably Gnosticism.
To say, Nestorianism was a reaction to the Virgin Mary being called Theotokos, which means God-bearer. And so, at some level, what you're saying is right. He was worried about people saying that Mary had God inside of her. He wanted to say that there was a Jesus that was inside of her, which was a human child. And then as that child was born, then became God. So she didn't have God inside of her. God came into this child after leaving Mary.
So this is all motivated to knock Mary down a few pegs? Is that the deal?
There was what the chapter is describing is that there was like rampant Mary worship, and so part of that Mary worship came from seeing her as having God inside of her, like the literal, like she was the
Theotokos,
the God bearer. I'm trying to draw. She was the ark. You know what I mean? Like there was great honor given to her because of God being inside of her, and so to knock that down a few pegs, he was trying to say that no, she had this human child inside of her that was then Christ after, like became God
afterwards
after being birthed. Yeah. So. Yeah. So maybe. So yes. So to add more validity to what you're saying, yes, that is a piece of it. Okay. So let's move on to. I'm going to breeze through a few and then get us to Gnosticism. We'll camp out at Gnosticism. I'll make some wrapping up remarks and then we will be done with this. So just to name a few of the other heresies, this AJ might relate more to what you're talking about. Adoptionism. Is Jesus Christ the Son of God by nature or by adoption? That is to say, was he born the Son of God or did he become the Son of God? People often will point to his baptism as a point where he becomes the Son of God at that point, in a sense that he was just a dude for 30 years, then gets baptized and becomes the Son of God. And that gets shot down. The answer to that is nah. The next one is...
Why? What's the...
it's like getting assumed into the... Who are the Masons? Like you have your ceremony and then you're a Mason.
Someone. Yep.
Yep.
There's a charm to it of that Christ is in fact one of the people. He is like there's... I find it, I love that for 30 years he essentially was just like a carpenter and probably like a really awesome carpenter. But like there wasn't anything big in his life for those first 30 years.
I wonder if he had a reputation for just making the most perfect tables.
Must have been, right?
Yeah.
I bet they were really good. But for 30 years, there's like nothing to remark on in his life. And then...
But does he need to be perfect at making tables to be God? Like I see that my students say this from time to time. It's like, if Jesus played basketball, he just drained threes all day. And it's like, maybe I doubt it. I mean... That doesn't seem to... Like,
missing a three that's not sin.
Yeah.
And making
missing the mark.
Table.
Like in some very literal sense, not getting the goal, not getting it in the hoop is literally missing. I don't...
No, but it's not, but missing is not a sin. Like getting something wrong in math isn't sinful. It's not.
So
it's just an error.
In our professional learning community, in our training as a part of Veritas, AJ and I are in a group together where we're reading through Tim Keller's... It's a book about work.
Work is worship?
I don't remember the name of it.
Something about work?
Yep. It's about work. Anyway, AJ was asking about, will light bulbs have to be replaced in heaven? And my answer was no, because the light bulbs won't break. Like, the sin of the light bulb is that it breaks. Like, the incompleteness.
Disagree.
That's fine. But, like, the fallen nature of the light bulb is that it breaks. Like, in Dante's Purgatory, there are all these instances where every time he like takes a fruit from a tree, it grows back immediately because the perfect form of that tree is the tree with whatever its fruit is. In the same way with, I think someone like way out holied me and was like, there won't be any light bulbs because God will be the light of the city, which was a good answer. But just to say that like the fact that things break down is because of the fall. That's fine. But the fact that we get things wrong, I don't know. There's a difference between getting them wrong and learning. This feels like a separate episode. You want to say anything before I move on?
No, it's just I don't think that not understanding something immediately is somehow part of the fall. Like I think I find no problem with Joseph teaching 14-year-old Jesus how to like level his shelf when his first shelf was all willy wonks. That doesn't to me indicate that he is like not divine. Yeah,
because I don't think an unlevel shelf even has to do with the sin curse of the world. Like it's not like unlevel shelves came in with sin. Or and if you talk about the perfect form of the tree, I think again we're letting some Greek ideas. I think the perfect form of the tree is one that is growing and produces fruit, not necessarily one that has all its fruit. Right? It's not sin to have someone eat the beautiful fruit you've produced.
No. But that's why,
because is that moment when he plucked the fruit, the split second before the new fruit automatically grew back, like some kind of the tree's sin? I mean, that doesn't make any sense. That doesn't.
No, but I don't know. I'm happy to return to this another time, but yeah. So moving on in heresies, the next one, which I will for sure butcher.
I feel like we're going to have to return to this. I mean, you signed a statement of faith.
I don't think I became heretical at this point. Okay, this is awkward. Theo, I'm going to mispronounce this one, sorry. Theopascatism. Is Jesus Christ able or unable to suffer in his divine nature? This is a fun one. So when Jesus is on the cross, what is suffering? And the answer is that it is not his divine nature. What this point is getting at is that the divine nature of Christ is immovable. So God can choose to change his mind. God can choose to love. God can do all these things, but he is not impacted by things outside of God.
The vicissitudes of life.
Yeah, that. So the suffering on the cross, yes, was very painful, but did not impact then the divine nature of Christ, which is a deep mystery as to how that worked. But just say that. Okay.
And that's the heresy.
The heresy was saying that Christ suffered in his divine nature on the cross. That's the heresy.
Is that the divine nature suffered?
Yes, because it was impacted by something outside of. To say that the divine nature suffered is to say that something outside of God can impact God, and that's not true. You all are looking at each other.
Well, I just realized we may be heretics.
Okay, which is fine.
No, it's just because.
I'm going to have to go do some thinking.
That's fine.
Yeah, me too. Like Jesus,
in the shower for a
Jesus
while.
wept, right?
Yes.
John 11,
Yep.
where he sees where Lazarus is dead,
Yep.
has died. We're to say that God is not moved by suffering, or
He
is being moved by suffering a suffering?
is being moved by suffering.
Like if you to be sad, to suffer alongside somebody.
Is that suffering?
Yeah.
Let me try. God suffers not in his divinity, but in his humanity. The impassible divine nature was not confused with or changed into passible human nature in the person of Christ, but the impassible divine nature was united with his human nature indivisibly and inseparably, so that, as a whole person, God could suffer in Christ as a man. So, yes, Jesus wept.
But God doesn't weep. God the Father doesn't weep.
Someone's going to send us an email about this one. Let me...
All right, listeners. Does God the Father weep?
Where's my other one? There's one about God loving... Yeah, but this is not so. God isn't loving despite being impassible. He is loving because he is impassible. Remember our definition. The impassible God can't be acted upon from without and can't change himself from within. If God is love, that's good news because nothing can change that.
So the notion depends on suffering being able to change God.
A
Is
thing
that- is that-
outside of God, yes.
Is that the idea?
Well, the idea is that something outside of God cannot change God.
But suffering, therefore, in this conception, is that it changes God.
Yes.
I would have to have someone explain why suffering changes someone.
Why suffering changes someone? Because it hurts.
Because it's an
If
outside.
I punch you, you're going to hurt, right? I've impacted you.
I haven't changed.
You have been hurt.
Still me, bruh.
But you've been hurt. Like I have impacted you.
Literally.
Thank you.
Okay, I get you.
Sorry.
But is the corollary to like if we give praises to God, are we not changing him? Is he not pleased by it? And is anti-suffering?
He's ultimately pleased all the time, I think, would be the answer to that. He's having a great time.
Just having a jolly guy.
Yeah.
That's the
jovial of
That's
all.
one about loving. He is loving no matter what. There's no changing that from the outside.
I gotta think upon.
That's fine.
Okay. Yeah.
This is my problem of cramming all of these. I now regret this and am not going to do it. Let's skip to Gnosticism. So would you all please tell me what Gnosticism is?
I mean, Greek. So the word gnosis means to know. Is it to know, knowledge? And it's based on.
Wasn't it kind of a secret knowledge cult?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a secret
Yeah.
knowledge cult, and it has a couple of wings. So one is that the sort of the farther along there's like the initiates orthodoxy, and then there's like the secret orthodoxy for those who are like super into Christianity. That's
Gnosticism.
one part of it, yeah, with Gnosticism.
Yeah.
And then the other part is a strong belief in the sort of evilness of matter and creation.
And the goodness of pure spirit.
And the goodness of pure spirit. And part of what God has called us to is to escape the bonds of our meat prisons and, be with him in a pure matter spiritual realm. So it has lots of ties over to a lot of Eastern religions as well.
And if I remember
Buddhism
right,
probably being the closest one.
if I remember right, in the higher echelons, isn't the doctrine that Jesus or whatever spirit indwelt Jesus, which I'll get to in a second, wasn't even the highest, most preeminent God. He was sort of a sub-God of several.
A demiurge or something
A demiurge.
like that.
And then so the big problem with Gnosticism, and this is what got everybody up in arms, is that the Christology changes. Because matter is so evil, God could never become matter because it's evil and gross and terrible, and pure spirit is way better. So Jesus was just some regular dude that got possessed by a pure spirit that sort of walked him around like a meat puppet. And then at the moment of crucifixion, abandoned him right before he died. So this poor Jesus fella got indwelt by a spirit, possessed and walked around, and then woke up right before he got smoked on a cross. And that, because they didn't think that pure spirit could die, it couldn't be a part of this thing called death, right? It's eternal. And so only the matter, what was left, Jesus, this poor guy, died. So yeah, there was no pure commingling of the natures. He was not 100% God and 100% man. He was meat puppet.
A lot of time they get sort of swept up into sort of ecstatic expressions of spiritual indwellings, and that sometimes, and oftentimes in the ancient world, that had expressions of, sort of perverse sexual rites and that kind of thing. Every once in a while, you would get this sort of prophet person that would say, "I am also indwelt by some strong spirit, and I've got this new message to add to it," and you get this sort of cult following. And
I think the attraction was the secret knowledge thing. Everybody wants to know all the secrets, and it was attractive at the beginning because it says matter is gross, and everybody doesn't like having diseases. And you got your bum toe, and you think, yeah, that is pretty terrible, and I like to think my pure spirit is separate than that, and eventually I won't have to deal with this meat prison. And plus, there's secret stuff to learn later, right? All that's attractive.
Yeah, and it's practically, it works out to keep adherence because you've got people, you've got the next sort of level to get to, and people will be like, okay, well, if I just keep doing this thing that the people above me keep telling me to do, then I'll get level up, and then I can learn the next little secret knowledge. And so it's keeps a good retention rate on the old mystery cult.
Which someone brought up Masons before, but kind of feels like in the same vein as that.
Feels to me more like Scientology.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say too.
The greatest secrets are kept to the highest echelons, and to get there, you have to be so far indoctrinated already that when you finally arrive, you accept it as pure fact.
Yeah. So to focus it, Gnosticism is the heresy which asserts that people are saved by being initiated into a special kind of spiritual knowledge, taught by a Jesus who was not fully human and did not die, and by practicing special disciplines in order to effect spiritual release from the evil material realm created by the demiurge, which is what was just brought up.
So we pretty much nailed it, is what you're saying.
And thus bring about reunion with the transcendent divine being. Yeah, you crushed it. So, so they're currently holding hands. So congratulations.
Tra-la-la.
You guys just missed the most awkward high five.
It was pretty embarrassing. So, yes, problems of Gnosticism is that it's teaching that you can't trust what's been handed down in the church. It's all, these are general truths, but they're actually special ones that you can find out. And yeah, you've gotten to the allure of it, of getting that special knowledge. It
can be highly individualistic, so people can claim that they've got their own special knowledge and they've got their own take on it, and it's been revealed to them privately. And
the parts of what you all are talking about are heresy of the free spirit, which we're not going to cover today or probably ever. But free spirit is where you get into there being two different types of wills, like the one that most normal people get and the one that special people get. But that's beside the point. So, Graham, you brought up a hot take on Gnosticism being some form of modern heresy. Do you want to say more about that?
I think just the sharp separation between mind and body, our sort of modern take on it. The other one being that a strong willingness and ability or desire to say that I've sort of come up with my own personal take on this thing that does not need to come under any sort of outside authority, and I can just kind of do it on my own. So the sort of cafeteria, or the cafeteria model of taking this little piece of this and this little piece of this and this little piece of this and mushing it together into my own private spirituality, I would say is a form of Gnosticism. And But the biggest one, I think, is the separation of that you've got a spiritual reality as a person and you've got a physical reality as a person. And those two things do not necessarily have to have any currency. That there is a real, true Magby deep down inside that is separate from the meat Magby that we see in front of us. And your physical body does not have any bearing on this sort of spirituality of your heart. We have secular versions of it bouncing around in a lot of the philosophy around identity and the idea of like what is a person, how does some person come across their identity, and a lot of the language is talked about that there is a psychological identity on the inside that does not necessarily need to be beholden to the outside realities of the physical space. I think a lot of this is finding a lot of currency on the internet, because the internet can basically, you can separate the real world from the online world, and it can help sort of train that disconnect where you can have your avatar life and then you can sort of separate that from your meat space world, and things like virtual reality is going to sort of amplify those habits of fracturing the self.
Yep. Another form of this, taken from the book, is there a modern day version of Gnosticism that Christians should seek to avoid? A psychotherapy which suggested that the knowledge that we gain of ourselves in the psychotherapeutic relationship is itself what makes us whole human beings would perhaps be a genuine Gnosticism in a contemporary form. It would have substituted self-knowledge for God's redemptive initiative in Christ. For Gnostics, ancient and modern, Jesus redeems us by teaching, by helping us to understand ourselves. For the church, Jesus is not just a teacher, but the Christ, the risen Lord, the Word made flesh for the world's redemption.
Mm-hmm. So. And this is, although we were talking about this before the podcast, this would be where I find personally the break that I have with sort of popular psychologists. I think Jordan Peterson, who we've never talked about on the podcast before, but I know we all at some points listened to. This would be personally my break that I have with him, is that at the end his conclusions are that it is the self's responsibility. If I understand him correctly, it's the self's responsibility and the self-knowledge that has one about themselves, which is the locus of salvation. And Christian orthodoxy would say that the locus of salvation is outside. It is a repentance to God and a salvation by means of His Spirit. And so that would be, I don't know if I'm calling Jordan Peterson a Gnostic. Maybe I am.
Maybe.
But that would be at least the seeds of that kind of idea, that salvation comes from a self-knowledge, from really sort of looking deep in yourself and understanding who you are and saying, like, who do I want to be? And then picking that. And then picking that and then doing that. Yep. Or believing that you can do that and it is going to happen apart from God.
Yep. All right, just to wrap up on this. So what are some of the main, why does any of this stuff matter? So a thing that we've said before is that we only get to a place of theology by having these disagreements. So because of heretics, we get orthodoxy, we get the creeds, we get confessions, we get the statements of faith through heresy, through disagreements in the church. So there is a benefit to heresy, which it feels like a weird thing to say, but something that the book likes to, bring up every once in a while is that the word heresy is used in the Greek translation. Is that the right way to say that? Anyway, in 1 Corinthians. So heresy, according to its Greek root, denotes opinion or school of thought. Paul, in his first letter to the Corinthians, writes that there should be different opinions. Literally, he uses the word heresies. Among them, so it says that there should be different opinions, there should be heresies among them, in order that those who are genuine may be recognized. It was only later that the term acquired its pejorative meaning of erroneous opinion.
Yeah, I think that's where a lot of people stumble, is the idea that is the pejorative use of it.
Yep.
I mean, I think every Christian at some point has
a heretical
belief
right.
that they need to work itself out or they need to understand. Even AJ and I on this podcast thinking about God's suffering, right? Like now we need to sit down and sort of think through this. Well, what's at stake? What's at stake by saying God suffers, and what isn't at stake by saying God suffers, and working that out. if we are obstinate in the face of it, and we hold to one thing because I don't know, because of a sunk cost fallacy or whatever,
Right.
then that's where it becomes sort of a personal problem or a relational problem with you and the church and you and God. But honestly, working out your understanding of how these things work, and I think is part of faith.
For our listeners, two notes. First, the sunk cost fallacy. If you don't know what that is, I think it's that you stick to an idea because you've already put so much effort or money into it. Mm-hmm. Like, we got to keep on keeping on because
it's the 4 a.m. this essay's crap, but I'm gonna keep going with it.
Yeah, I can't start a new one.
Yeah.
And then if you are not a Christian and listen to this podcast, I know there's some of you out there, then I think this information is still valuable in understanding the progression of the early church and understanding how just the historicity of how the church deals with differing opinions and how those opinions in the church came about. Like, that's still pretty valuable.
No,
just
I
understanding
agree.
the
I think
history
it's a
of it.
broader point, though. It's that if someone disagrees with you about something, that you should seek to understand why they disagree.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the history of heresy. Of it's two people with valid points on both sides coming to eventually say one is right, but you have to understand the other side first.
Yeah.
And I think we like to make fun of people who read classics poorly because they approach it with a political lens before they approach the work. But there's a value in understanding why people are approaching it that way. There's
a value in understanding it.
Yeah, it doesn't mean you should read. We're so far over time that I have much more to say, but I won't. Just to wrap up, so one piece of it is that we understand our beliefs by engaging in disagreement. That's the first point, and that is not only for Christians, that is for anyone. And the second, I think, is also a broad point, is what happens to these heretics. Are they all killed? Are they all kicked out? And here's a fun quote. What happened to these people? Arius was banished, but later recalled, and Athanasius was ordered to receive him back into communion.
Seriously?
Yes.
Oh, I didn't even know that.
Apollinarius lived to a ripe old age and himself seceded from the church. He was not kicked out. After Nestorius' views were condemned, he was sent back to his monastery at Antioch, though he was eventually exiled to Upper Egypt, which isn't great. Eutyches was also deposed and exiled. One of the adoptionists, we did talk about that. One of the adoptionists retained possession of his position of bishop all his life, and Peter the Fuller of the Theopaschites, so the suffering of the divine nature people, was still patriarch of Antioch at the time of his death. Marcion, like Pelagius, was excommunicated. Valentinus the Gnostic seceded, so himself chose to leave. None of these men had his blood shed on account of his views. I trust I am not so naive as to assume that killing or physically wounding someone is always the worst thing you can do to them. There's more than one way to skin a heretic, ha ha ha. But let it at least be stated that none of these men died or bled when his opinions were denounced. It is a prejudice to assume that heresy hunters are all torturers and sadists, or in hoc to the same. History doesn't support it.
Yeah, we have this idea of like the Inquisition
Yep.
when it comes to heresies, but that's not what the early church
Did.
was happening.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not what they wanted. They desired
Besides, the early church was getting hunted down anyway.
Yeah, so they didn't need to hunt their own. But just to say, it was not all killing of people who disagreed with them. There was a desire to be reconciled, and more often than not, whoever was eventually branded a heretic chose to leave themselves. So I think that matters. But anyway, that's
Cool.
what I got.
All right. Well, thank you, audience, for tuning in to this heretical episode of Classical Stuff You Should Know. You can email us at classicalstuff@veritasacademy.net. You can check us out on Twitter at CLSSCAL. Check out our website, which is classicalstuff.net. And you can see us about town.
About town.
walking
We are men
around.
about town,
Doing-
swinging our canes,
Doing the things.
wearing our capes,
We fancy.
holding our monocles above
that's-
our poor eye.
That's us. Well, thanks for listening. Let's just stop.
Good.
Let's just
Bye.
stop.
Ciao.